Hola, mi gente. You are listening to Dancing Into Parenthood, the Entre la Familia series, where Latinos get to hear our stories about raising our children with special needs. I am your host, Dr. Divina Lopez, board certified pediatrician for over 10 years and mom to a little boy with autism and ADHD. My motherhood journey has been my greatest inspiration to creating this podcast because when it comes to our community, we have unique circumstances that we keep entre la familia that we need to share and no longer keep quiet about. On this show, I will give you the tools, information, and strategies to raising a happy and healthy human being. Each week, I am connecting you with other Latino families who have generously shared their personal journeys and struggles so that you can have clarity and insight on what it takes to raise such a special child. Before the episode starts, I want to remind you to follow us on social so you don't miss out on all the support I love to share with you. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok at Dr. Divina Lopez, and any place that you hang out on the internet. Also, I can't wait to start the parent sessions. We're starting group parent sessions, and I want you to be there. I want to help guide you if you are struggling with parenthood, if you don't have support, if you're insecure about the choices that you're making for your child, if you just want to get it right for your child, then I encourage you to join the 12-week program where we will meet once a week and I will teach you how to advocate for your child, how to navigate the medical system, how to navigate the educational system, where to find your support system, and how to build healthy family relationships so we can break those toxic cycles, create boundaries with family members, and also learn to love ourselves through it all. All right, mi gente, I want to see you there. So make sure that you go to my website and that you drop your email in there. That way you are the first to know when the group sessions start. Now let's get into the episode. Welcome to Dancing Into Parenthood. Today, I really have a special guest because as you can see, it's not a mom, it's a dad. We have Francis Lora here, and he is a person that I connected with through community with George Torres. And I think, we have lots of the same interests, and that's probably why we connected so easily and so naturally. Is because we both have children on the spectrum. It's because we both love, talking about this sort of thing. I think that we are both like individuals who are more maybe like on the intellectual side, and we've been trying to do something for a very long time. So I wanted to invite him onto the podcast for the Entre la Familia series because he has a wealth of information to share, because not only is he a dad, so we're going to get the dad's perspective today, right, and hear about his fatherhood journey with his son who's on the spectrum, but he also is a, a a clinical social worker, right?
Yeah, licensed clinical social worker. Yeah.
Yes, licensed clinical social worker. And go ahead, Francis. You're going to say it better than me. So I
Yeah.
want you to go ahead and elaborate.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what people don't realize is that many times when they go to therapy, they're most likely working with a licensed clinical social worker because that's a big part of what we do. And I personally have been doing it now for almost 20 years.
Wow.
Yep. Yep. So a lot of what we deal with typically, depression, anxiety, and these are a lot of things that come up for our parents, especially when we first find out, about our children if there's some kind of a diagnosis. So that's kind of like what I do. I've also been doing groups
Mm-hmm.
for parents and trying to create community. When I found out about My son's diagnosis, I don't know, at that time, I didn't know if it was common, but I felt like my wife is a teacher. She's an
Mhm,
elementary school teacher and
mhm.
also has a special ed license and everything. So at the time, I don't know if it's because we were both professionals that we didn't kind of get that support. I mean, they were wonderful in terms of finding resources, for our son and everything. But we felt like we were kind of left adrift. And over time, the more I spoke to parents, the more I learned that that's actually more common. Everybody focuses on the child, but then we're kind of left to figure stuff out for ourselves. So I decided to kind of start that group to create that community to start us on that path so that we can put our masks on first and then our children. And also to, bring that to the attention of the professionals. The professionals, a lot of the times might not think, oh, the parents also need the help, especially in those critical, first couple of hours, days, when you're kind of processing that.
You know, usually I start off with asking the parents, like, let's go back in time. But since you brought this up, let's talk
Mhm.
about this
Yeah,
because this is huge, right? I feel the same exact way, right? Everybody is rushing, like you get a diagnosis and then
right.
you get all these referrals. And it's like you got to call this one for this one, you got to set up this therapy, you got to do this service, you got to do the next one, this is what you got to do at school, right? But then the parent support and training could be so much better, right? Because we are the ones with our children every single day. And if you don't train the parent correctly, and if you don't support the parent correctly, how can they support their child? And I don't know why there's that missing link. I know that right now the medical industry itself is just lacking support in so many ways, right? Like I'm gonna tell you what happened to me prior to getting onto this recording today. And
Okay.
like I have a headache, okay? I
Right.
have a headache. I'm gonna share this with you and with everybody because this is real life stuff. This is exactly what happened.
Mhm.
So right now I've been trying to make an appointment to follow up with my son's developmentalist. The last
Mhm.
time he saw her was in 2021. 2022, I tried making appointments. No one could give me an appointment. I was even physically in the facility seeing
Right.
another specialist and try to make an appointment, and they couldn't give me an appointment. They said, "We don't have anything available. You're gonna have to keep calling us back."
Mhm.
This was the answer that I got. And people don't believe me when I talk about these things because they're like, "Oh, you're a doctor." And I'm like, "It doesn't matter. There's no difference, right?"
No.
And I worked at this hospital. I had an affiliation with this hospital before. Anyway, so I just called again, and the person who picked up immediately just tried to tell me like there are no appointments available and like try to rush me off the phone. And I said, wait. And I don't like to have to use that tone of voice. I said, wait.
Right.
I've been trying to get an appointment for a really long time. And she goes, well, since you were in here last year, you're considered a brand new patient. I said, that's impossible. We've been here for multiple specialists, and my son is her patient. We
Right.
missed last year only because you guys couldn't give us an appointment. I'm trying to make another appointment for him. We're not accepting new patients. This is what she kept telling me. I said, we are not new patients.
Right.
We are established patients with this specialist, and I need an appointment. So she said, okay, you know what? Let me speak to her and I'll call you back. And she goes, anyway, we don't have appointments until 2024. I said, I understand that, but I need a real physical date because you guys keep pushing me back and I'm not seeing anyone. And I said, and I realized that this is a problem everywhere. And I told her, and I'm a pediatrician. I get it. I see this everywhere I go. Okay. But I need this doctor to give me an appointment.
Right.
So she said, okay, let me speak with her. And now the whole tone changed, right? Okay, let me
Mhm.
speak with her and I'll give you a call back. And she called me back in literally 5 minutes and gave me an appointment. And I feel for people who can't do that, right? Because most people can't do that, right? Most
Mhm.
people don't have the language as parents to say, wait, I need this appointment. What can we do? What are the alternatives? Who are the other people that could be helpful in this situation, right? And I especially feel for our community because we are so respectful. We
Right.
are, very
very different compared to other cultures, maybe.
Hmm.
And we don't want to be the squeaky wheel.
Right.
And because of that, so many times our children don't get the services and the support that they deserve, or their diagnosis, or, get to have a visit with the people that are important to see. Um, and they easily get brushed to the side.
Yeah, but even the people who get frustrated enough, because that also happens, you have all this going on, you've already like, you had to step forward and kind of use the tone. But you know what? Some parents, they get frustrated, they call, and they may have the words and they may try to be patient and everything, and even be the most respectful people. But for some people, enough is enough, and they'll get so upset and then scream at them, come out of their face, and then they're labeled as the angry parent. And then they get the opposite result. It's like they'll push their appointments like 5 years down the line or something, all because they did not realize kind of what the situation was. They just thought, oh, here's another angry person.
Right.
Meanwhile, it's just the frustration level had already gotten to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a headache from just dealing with that situation because I'm not a confrontational person, right? Doing that is hard, but I know that I have to advocate for my son. And sometimes finding the help feels really impossible. Like it could really feel so challenging that sometimes you just want to give up. You're just like, okay, if everybody's treating me like this, and if everybody's telling me there's no appointments, then I have to work, right? Like I have to also do my regular stuff. I have to have my full-time job. I have to take care of the home. I have to take care of my child. And then on top of this, I'm trying to make appointments, and it feels really defeating, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, and I'm happy that you have resources that can help parents for these sort of things, which we'll talk about later. But while I have you here, what I really wanted to accomplish in this podcast with you is to talk about your fatherhood journey, which is unique, right? Because you
Hmm.
have this insight into this sort of diagnosis, and you know more than the average person, right?
Right.
Um, but just tell me, when you go back in time and you think about your son and you think about, like, what were some of the first like signs that you
Hmm.
noticed? Would you share that with everybody?
Sure, sure. I mean, it's interesting. Hindsight is 2020, and you're right. There's definitely things in terms of the inside track. I was aware of the diagnosis beforehand in terms of how I would present in other people, but you're never really, as a parent, when you're wearing that hat, you're not thinking about that and your child specifically. You're kind of just trying to be the best parent that you can be. So after I learned about the diagnosis, then a lot of things did start kind of falling more into place. I mean, a couple of things that I did notice was that as a child, Alejandro was very kind of colicky. Like I had to put him to sleep, I had to pick him up and kind of hold him tight. He liked being swaddled.
Yeah.
He kind of liked to touch. He did at one point have kind of like what looked like a little bit of maybe like a seizure like thing, but it was like so brief that I questioned myself. But
Yeah.
there was some kind of activity that wasn't quite right. And I mentioned it to the doctor too. And I said, it was the middle of the night. I hadn't slept, but I think I saw XYZ because,
Yeah.
you're not sure and you still
Yeah.
want to bring it up. But it was like a split second thing. And of course, they're like, oh, don't worry about it. You haven't been sleeping. Nothing may have happened. So that kind of got brushed to the side.
Let me just really
Yeah,
quickly stop
yeah,
you there, because whenever this stuff happens, right? And I know that doctors don't mean to like brush things to the side like
right,
that, right? Because it can be something. The
right,
piece of information that I always tell people when a parent tells me something like this, like I thought I saw a weird movement, or I
yeah,
observed something, right?
right.
I always ask them, the next time, can you get it on a video so I could see?
Mm, yeah,
This is really important. So parents, just pay attention to this sort of thing, because seizures are more prevalent in kids with autism, kids on the spectrum, or even kids that are developmentally delayed. So that for me is a big deal, right? Like if you came telling me that when I was in private practice and you were a
Sure.
dad that's presenting
Yeah.
your baby to me, I would have said that immediately. Like, do me a
Yeah.
favor, please. The next time
Right.
you see that movement or something that you observe that you
Yeah.
think is just a little strange or something like that,
Yeah.
get it on video and send it to me so that I can have a look at it too. And
Right.
also,
And
just like note down how many times it's happening, right? How long
right. Yeah. Yeah. And that was the thing. It really was like maybe once that I saw it. So I was fine. Okay. I let that one go. The other thing is that when he was going to sleep, sometimes he would pull at his eyelashes as a way to go to sleep, you know. Uh like to soothe himself or something. He was literally just kind of pulling at his eyelashes to go to sleep. That was something, but again, as a parent, I'm not thinking about it. It wasn't that constant. It happened every once in a while. I kind of noticed it, but again, pushed to the side. Um, then some things started happening that were sort of more traditional. I mean, he played with toy trains and lined them up and had a big thing for Thomas. I mean, not that that's how you diagnose autism. If your kid loves Thomas and he's lining up his train, it's not automatically, okay, this kid is autistic. We got to get him the services. But definitely, it's a strong reason to kind of follow up and get further information. But we weren't concerned because he was still, in many ways, and continues to this day, developing very appropriately. I mean, he was affectionate. He did kind of like to have his hand squeezed and things like that and get hugs. So in that sense, he did learn his letters right away. Early, actually. That was the thing. So we were very proud of him. He could decode words in books, even in Spanish or English, just based on their order. And he even started memorizing the presidents. That was his big thing. He knew all of the presidents, vice presidents. Then it grew into logos, history of logos, companies, studios. And I'm like, yo, this kid is going to be something, like he has all of these things that even I got interested in because I'm like learning all these new things.
Right. They teach you
right.
all of these things and you're like, oh my God, this is fascinating. And I went through the same stuff with my son. We have an amazing Thomas collection that one day I should show everybody. And that is a really like common one that you see. But the same here, like my son was all about the planets. He could tell me everything about the solar system, like every single planet, all the facts, right? I mean, these are like really beautiful things. He went through a time where it was all about whales. He knew every whale species. He could tell you how big they were, how long they were, how much they weighed, like all of these things, right? And these are early signs, right? Because these are their special interests that they really get like obsessed about and they love them so much and they could go on and on and on and on with their monologue about these things because they memorize these facts. And for a young kid, grasping in all this information, as parents, we're like, yes, look at this kid is amazing, and their brains are so special. Their brains are amazing. Their brains are so special. Like these are really super unique gifts that they have, right? They have certain strengths that like the average person does not have. And so when we see these things, we're not usually thinking something like, oh, this person might be on the spectrum, right? We're just like super proud of our kids and we're thinking ahead in the future, like, wow, if they're doing this at this age, imagine what they're going to be doing later on in the future. And we also love to show it off a little bit, right? Like when you're with the family, you're like, look at what this kid could do. And everybody's like oohing and ahhing, and it's super cool and it's super great. But these are signs of a person who is on the spectrum, right? So yeah, but I'm trying to think, a lot of babies do present with that colic, like you said, right? Like my son was extremely colicky. It was horrible. He never slept. And also they love to be like really close and they love to be in that swaddle because it really holds them nice and tight, right? They're soothed really nicely there. Or they love to be like in the swing, like they love that sort of movement.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. My son loved the mamaru. I don't know if you had that one, but there was like a setting on that thing where it would go like around and around, and he wanted it at the highest speed. And I was like, no, bro, like you're not on a roller coaster. I was so nervous. I'm like, why is
Right, yeah.
like only wants it on the highest speed?
Mhm.
But these are some of the like early signs that you might see, right? Um, and I think it's always interesting when we look back, right? Because we're like, man, we missed this or missed that, and because a lot of these things can happen in typical development,
Right, yeah.
right? You're not going to
Mhm.
just like point this one thing out and be like, oh my God, I think this, right? Um,
And it was also the fact that, we were first time parents, even though we did all the classes, the Lamaze, the different things that we all did it, but I was an only child, my wife has a brother, but they're, not that far apart. And in terms of our families, everybody was justified. It's like, oh, phases and whatever. It wasn't until kind of like the squeaky wheel gets the oil, like when we put him in daycare,
mm,
that's what did it, because they were able to actually observe and see him interacting with others. So that's the first thing. He had challenges interacting and sort of reciprocating play. And on top of that, the other thing was that's when the tantrums came out, like outside. Because at home, it's one thing, it's just at home. We kind of figure we can deal with them. We work ways out. But when
yeah,
you're trying to take your child, either to a daycare or bring him, take him home from a daycare, and they throw themselves on the ground and get the superhuman strength where they kind of like bear down on the ground, like make themselves heavier so that kind of like in the Incredibles, like Baby Jack, like you can't lift them, or they go under that chair and there's no way to get them out of there. That's when they were like, you may want to kind of think about, getting an evaluate. We're not saying there's anything,
yeah.
but you're having so many challenges. We're noticing these behaviors. Let's just find out, how we can help them and address some of these challenges.
And how old was he when you put him in there?
Well, he was at the time, I would say, probably like 2 to 3. So he got his actual diagnosis by 4. And that was its own kind of story, because I mean, they give you the initial ones from the Department of Health. He went to Birch, which is one of the centers, and that's how he started with the early education piece, and
Mm-hmm.
all those things, which eventually helped us find the ASD Nest School, that being a program that actually was researched and started by NYU and Hunter, which puts them in classrooms with other typically developing children, co-teachers, and they get sort of pulled out or pushed in as necessary so that they can get the services.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's that's really good. But again, like your child is considered like a high functioning.
Right, correct. Like he would have had Asperger's if that still existed. So yeah.
Right, right. So it's no longer a diagnosis. We did talk about this on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we get these revised versions of our DSMs. So it's and this is a little controversial too, with that whole diagnosis being taken out.
Right.
Um, I have to explain that history, I think, in another recording, but it is pretty interesting how, you know, I feel like once the diagnosis was becoming a little more prevalent in like Black and brown boys, then
Mm-hmm.
that diagnosis went away, and now it's just like the spectrum. And I still think that somewhere in the future, all of that is going to change too, because the spectrum is just too like.
Right. No, but the thing is, it's all political. And this is what I tell my clients, because, I'm working with different clients. And part of what it is about diagnosis is you need that to be able to access services. You need that for insurance purposes. But at the end of the day, you're not treating the diagnosis. The challenges and the interventions are still what you're really, kind of working on. So that's what I try to reinforce. It's like, it doesn't matter if you call it red. And I would actually argue that socially we kind of already have a lot of this stuff in the different cliques and groups that we get into. I mean, it's what back in the day some people would refer to, they'd categorize people like those are dweebs, geeks, nerds. They had all these vernacular terms that just kind of they use for certain traits that made these people a group. That's how easy it is to come up. Those are what I would call social diagnoses that people, or terms that they kind of came up with
Yeah,
during the
yeah.
time.
Like that's the nerdy kid who's
Yeah.
a little quirky.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Likes to be by themselves, is like super
Mm-hmm.
into like whatever they're into, and they're great at it. Like, that's where they shine. But yeah, it's I feel like that Asperger's diagnosis has really grown a lot when it comes to
Yeah.
the spectrum itself. Like I keep saying like the diagnosis of autism is exploding, but
Right.
I especially feel that is that section, which
Yeah.
seems to be just like really that section of
Hmm.
kids just seems
Right.
like exploding all over the place. Which I have so many like thoughts about. And when we look at genetics, when we look at uh just family histories like in general and stuff like
Yeah.
that, and you start pointing out like, remember that Theo, that
Hmm.
you know
Yep.
all that, they did that thing. And
Right. Yeah.
okay, you're noticing that
Hmm.
they're a little similar to that person, right? But we just didn't have that diagnosis before. Maybe that person was the black sheep of the family. Maybe
Exactly. That was Bruno.
right.
That's the one we're talking
Yes,
about.
yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's all of that. And so, sometimes you go to these appointments and they're asking you about family history, and they're asking you if anyone in your family has autism, and you're right away, you're like, no, we don't even know what
Right.
that is. Like, no, it doesn't exist in my family. But when you start thinking about some of these people, like I remember when my son was getting his evaluation, and his dad has two uncles that they don't have this diagnosis of autism. But I was like, what about your uncles? I know that they have these other diagnoses, but those are
Right.
people that we could potentially say like are on the spectrum, you know
Yeah.
and so I had to bring that up to the doctor, because I was like, they do have those sort of behaviors, right?
Right. Of
uh,
course.
I can't say that that they have autism, but I can
Right.
say that they're pretty similar to what you would consider to be autistic, right?
Right.
And so I think that that's important when we go to these appointments with the specialists, because they are trying to grasp as much information as possible. Usually, once you get a diagnosis, they are asking you to do genetic testing anyway. That's at your discretion, but obviously, it's going to give you more information, right? And if they can't pinpoint something, right now, sometimes you find out things later on, because we're just learning so much about genetics in general in the medical field. So you just never know, like, how that might be helpful.
Yeah, because one of the things that they always say that, it must be like on multiple parts of the gene. That's one. Two, I always argue that it's probably more 50-50 with girls. It's just the idea of masking and kind of like our lens as clinicians that make it problematic. So that's kind of like the other big thing. And I also would think that maybe in some ways this may be even be sort of a future evolution, because to solve a lot of the world's problems today, we need to start kind of thinking out of the box. I mean, like characters that I sometimes use, especially depending on the child or the person that I'll introduce them to, is people like Mr. Spock, for example. That was one of the classic kind of characters in the past. Or Dr. Carrie Magro, for an example of somebody who's gone on and kind of been professional. Just different people who are out there that they can see and maybe relate to. Sometimes they even compare it to Superman. Like, I don't know if you remember, but there was a Superman where um, the evil villains kind of broke out of whatever prison they were in and they came to Earth. And at that time, they, of course, started getting the same superpowers because they were from the same planet. So, but at the time, it was kind of like it helped kind of defeat them in a way, because it was super hearing. They couldn't deal with it. They were covering their ears and they were suffering a lot. Meanwhile, you have, Clark Kent here, who has been around and has learned to kind of cope with it. He maybe that's his sort of form of autism, that he's had to learn to kind of have the nice counseling,
Yeah.
hearing things and whatnot.
Yeah, you're the movie buff, so I don't remember any of this stuff. But yeah, Francis is like great when it comes to these things. And I do want him to share these resources with people, because I think this is important just for you to even just understand, to see something makes a big difference, right? Um, but yeah, I say the same thing. I think humanity is changing, right?
Mhm.
And the way human beings are changing is that, maybe they're just becoming neurodivergent. And I think,
Mhm.
both of us, we had this conversation. Like, I do suspect that I am somewhere on the spectrum, and you told me the same about yourself. And
Mhm.
so then, there's always that, I love that you pointed out how women are definitely, like, we are not diagnosed as much as we should be. And it's
Right.
more because we are a little better at being social, right? We present a little differently um, than the boys. So, a lot of the females are getting diagnosed with things like OCD or
Mhm.
anxiety or depression versus, getting a diagnosis of autism. Um, and I mean, for me, it just helps to understand certain things about yourself in a better light. Like, I've always asked myself so many questions, like, how come I don't understand things the way people do? Like, I can understand complex things, but simple things are very hard for me sometimes to understand or communicate. But complex things are
Mhm.
easier for me for some reason, right?
Yep.
Like, I can do all of that
Oh no,
stuff.
my wife calls me out on it all the time. Like there's certain things that she's like, duh, like literally like simple, easy tasks. It's like, did you think to do this? I'm like, well, not really,
Right? Like,
It's
it
like
didn't even occur to me.
exactly, and
Yeah, yeah. And for those reasons, I always felt very strange as a woman, especially in the home, because where things came very naturally to other women, I never like gravitated or understood. Like, organizing is a big one for me, but I also have like ADHD. I do. So, that sort of like executive functioning
hmm
sort of things are a little harder for me. So I always felt like inadequate about certain things when it came to that. But then, like, you could give me a textbook and we're on,
hmm
because that's where I'm going to succeed. Give me something difficult or complex that, like, a normal person would be like, how is it that you could do that but you can't do this? And I'm like, I don't know. I wish
right.
I had, a better explanation. I don't. It's just the way our brains work. Our brains are just a little different, and everybody's different. And I'm always talking about, like, inclusion. This is
hmm
so important because everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses. And I just think that if we all knew how to, maybe help each other out in those ways, right? It would be a much better world. And that's what I hope is happening from all of this. That we're actually, like, creating better human beings. That's my ultimate hope, right? Like,
Yeah.
for me as a parent, it has been a very humbling experience, right? Like, where I think most of my life I felt so successful. This made me, like, re-examine so many things. It helped me in a way of, like, in parenting, you naturally learn love in a whole different way. But with my son, I really had to slow down in ways that I never would have without him, right? Like, paying attention to details became huge because that's just who he is. Um and just learning that I can accept these different sort of personalities in my life, and not only accept it but love it, like, so much,
Mhm.
because I've grown so much as a human being because of it. How do you feel about that part of how it impacts you as a parent?
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely hits you, especially when the first time I heard it. I remember, you kind of question everything. You do go through all of the stages of grief and all the stages of change all at once,
Absolutely.
positives and negatives, ups and downs. And like I said, that was kind of when I said, oh, I was probably on the spectrum. If I hadn't found Prep for Prep, which is that program that got me into private school, and found my tribe and, kind of went forward with that, if they'd actually been looking for it back then, if there's somebody, but the behaviors when I was around that age, I'm like, yeah, I used to do a lot of that stuff. So it brought greater understanding, and in remembering that, I think it made me be able to appreciate Alejandro a lot more,
Mm.
and just be able to sort of connect. I mean, it's between him and his brother Gabriel. Like I connect with them just kind of like where they're at, and then in different things, and usually it turns out to be pretty positive things. I mean, most recently, Alejandro has been introducing us to kind of like the history of Sonic the Hedgehog and kind of like the companies, because he wants his mother to learn how to play the video game.
Yeah.
So I'm all enjoying how he's getting this new vocabulary. He's learning like different things about business. He's learning also these other cultural things and all like, and I try to use that. Anything that he's interested in, we try to support. And even more recently, he's talking about maybe film editing and like other effects. So we're trying to get him classes. So I think the key thing with parenting in general, forget even just about the spectrum, is really loving and getting to know your child. Because I think the biggest mistakes we all make, professional or not, is thinking that our children are just extensions of ourselves and they're going to go accomplish the things that we wanted to do. Or, you know, some greater thing that we had in mind that maybe we didn't try to do, or maybe we did and didn't quite get there, that they're going to be the ones. And at the end of the day, no, they're, you know, they're loaned to us, you know, they come through us, but they are not us. And at the end of the day, it's about letting them find their way and supporting them.
And knowing who your kid is, like really, who are they, and getting curious about who they are, not trying to form them into who we want them to. Yeah, it's a huge lesson on acceptance. A really huge lesson on acceptance. Wow. You know, there's so many things that like I really want to talk to you about that I'm like, I feel like we need to do many more recordings. We really do, because I want to talk about, and I think that this is like really necessary. I want to talk about parenting as a neurodivergent individual, right? Because it can feel very overwhelming.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to give people some strategies and tools to be able to parent when you are neurodivergent. It's not that different, right? Because you have to have a lot of patience when it comes to parenting, but it's learning how to regulate yourself a lot, right?
And one interesting thing is, that reminds me of one client I had that was actually an adolescent. And when I met his parents, you know, initially, because they were the ones who had made the referral, they themselves, I could tell that they were probably there. And I, you know, and they had mentioned that their son had certainly been. And I'm like, listening to everything, I'm like, have you ever considered? And I kind of, you know, and, you know, they said, well, yeah, some people have said, and we do have the other family member, but we do not. I'm like, that's fine. And here are some tips that maybe you want to incorporate. Because at the end of the day, it's more about addressing the need, the behaviors, the challenges, than it is about like forcing a label. You can't force a label. I had another 15-year-old who was diagnosed recently. Again, I had told the mom he had a different diagnosis. Now he got the one that I mentioned, so he has it. He doesn't want to accept it. And I told him that's okay, but these are the, you know, benefits of accepting it and how you can use it in the future if you choose to. In the meantime, we'll continue your work in this area.
Yes.
And that's it.
One thing that I want to talk about before we end this one is, because I know you look at all the data and everything like that, right?
Yes. Yep.
And I myself am like divorced, and we know that families that have children with special needs have higher divorce rates, but in the Latino community specifically, it's really linked to machismo.
Yes.
Okay. So, and when I remember when I read this study, I was like, oh my God, this explains a lot to me, right?
Right. Yeah.
About how I felt during my marriage and going through my divorce and all of that. It was like there were so many answers in this study for me that I was like, wow, I wish that I had known this information before all of that. I don't know if there was a way to help, but it would have definitely helped me, right? And because you are a Latino family, and you are a man and you are a dad, and you know, tell me, like, what is it, number one, that maybe you've noticed, right? Because I don't put you in this category, but you know, you've grown up in it, right?
Right.
This is a big part of our culture also. And so whether or not you accept it or like it or hate it or whatever, we're in this, right? Like
Yes.
this is just part of the things that we see in our family. So I would just like to get like a little bit of what you would have to say, or what is your opinion about this, or is this even going anywhere? Is it changing anytime soon? Like, how have you maybe
Right.
not gone along with this sort of
Mhm.
behavior or
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things is that, yes, I've definitely seen the other side of it. Like my best friend racing from mom, whose son is also on the spectrum. She's actually made documentaries about it and everything to kind of help people. So those are out there, as well.
share those?
But yeah, definitely. But what I have noticed, and I think what's kind of helped me a bit, is one, being born and raised here and having the opportunities that I have to be in sort of other settings growing up, and sort of learning that there is another way, another option. Just being exposed to that, and is one thing. Exposure, it's something I think we're missing, and exposure in a way and in a place where it is accepted and you can see that it works. That's one. Two, there's also necessity and willingness to change and kind of grow. Like, even if you weren't traditionally a nurturing person because of your upbringing, for us to work with Alejandro, it's a partnership. It can't be just me, and it certainly can't be just her.
Yeah.
It's something where there's a big need that kind of forces you to, either you're going to learn to become a team player and everybody's going to work together to kind of move the family forward and
Mm-hmm.
help your son become the best he can,
Yeah.
or what's going to happen is, one or the other parent, because I have, there are some cases rare where, men also do end up being the single parent.
Mm-hmm.
There was actually a movie. It's the Accountant, which also had Ben Affleck playing sort of an autistic accountant. He had a brother. It was an action movie, but make of it what you will in terms of the dynamics, even when you see it or get a chance to see it. But the point is that I think that necessity is what forces you, and the connection that you have to your child, to do what you can to help them move forward. And lastly, I think we're both children of divorce, which I think is something interesting. A lot of people always say that if you're children of divorce, there's a higher chance that you yourself will also be, prone to divorce. But I think in our case, it's actually done the opposite, because we're both aware of the challenges that it has brought each of our parents. And I think that being raised by my grandmother, that I call Mama, she passed away quite a while ago, but I still hold her, very close by. I like even wear one of the rings she gave me on my chain, so she's always with me. But I think she gave me those values just in the nurturing she gave me growing up, and really kind of helping me learn to be helpful, and giving me that sort of perspective as well. So I think that those are some of the things and elements that are necessary to kind of, one, help a marriage stay together, but also to do what's right for your child. And I think ultimately, if that is kind of like what your priority is, you'll get it done. Doesn't matter, if you're machista. Like, I've seen tons of videos of very macho guys playing dress up with their daughters or sons because that is what they need, and that is where they're at, and they want it so badly for their child to feel accepted.
Along the lines of like, it's that sort of like blame on the mom.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, like what was really highlighted in that study. It's like, the moms really felt like the dads were just blaming them for
Mm-hmm.
their children behaving a certain way, or like in the culture, how, if your child is not the most well-behaved child, it's usually like back to the mom, like you didn't raise that kid correctly. And so there's a lot of shame that women carry because of that, and they wonder whether or not they are good
Yeah.
moms, and if they hear it in the household as well, it just makes it could be really difficult for these moms, especially if they have to stay in these relationships because they need the support,
Yeah.
financially or whatever it may be. um it really can feel almost like, there's a huge guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And when you constantly have this criticism or judgment or something, it can really make the world a horrible place for the mom, because she's just questioning herself in so many ways. Like, is she even up for this challenge of being a mother? Is she doing it correctly? Is she actually like a disservice to her own child? And so it really can hurt that relationship in so many ways, but mostly for herself, right? Where she's wondering about her own value and whether or not she should be present in this relationship or not. But I think you shared a lot of like really important things that I want to highlight, that it's not just if you're in a relationship together, because even if you decide to get a divorce or whatever, you still have to parent together, right? So
Exactly.
it's easier. If
Hopefully, I mean, because I mean that's the goal. I mean, but I hate to say it, but there are fathers out there that forget about it. I mean, and mothers, but you know, sometimes there are those individuals. So you would hope that, you know, at least your partner would go at least be able to do that much.
right, right, in a healthy way, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly. Yeah.
that's the I think that can become even more challenging if you decide to separate,
Yeah.
when it's just one partner trying to constantly put blame on the another one. It can really get very messy, and unfortunately the child is the one who ends up, you know having to deal with a lot of this messiness because the parents can't get it together. And you're right, like the priority has to be the child. You need to work as a team. You need to have some sort of partnership, and you both should be present in the child's life because, regardless of what people think, both parents are really important for a child, right? Any child. And so I just want to tell people, because one of the reasons why I even started Dancing Into Parenthood is to let people know, like, divorce is not an answer. It actually really can make things worse, right? Um, and so I have a goal of trying to inform families how to be supportive and work as a team so that they stay together and they can have a healthy relationship like you didn't have, right? Because you said your parents were divorced. Maybe a good model for what a healthy relationship looks like, but you did have someone in your family who could show you that, right? So sometimes we look at our parents and we can judge all we want about what their relationships were like, but we have to also look for those relationships that were really great. Maybe it wasn't our parents, maybe it was our cousin's parents, or
Right.
maybe it was our friends,
Or
whatever.
even grandparents, because I know that for my wife, for Jen, her grandparents, you know, over 50 years married, and still celebrating every
Beautiful.
day, can't
Yeah.
be apart from one another. So, you
Oh
know,
no, that's
sometimes it like
beautiful.
skips a you know, sometimes it may skip a generation, but you can still find it. I mean,
Yeah, you gotta look for those healthy relationships so you can model based off of that. Even if you didn't live in that sort of household. Sometimes I'm wondering like which ones were the ones in my life, but because usually, right, you still want to look for that healthy sort of relationship, and it is something that we have to think about. Like, we have to think about ourselves as people, and not just as parents. And moving forward in our families, if we want to create those healthy lifestyles in whichever kind of family we're in, I think, we have to get the right support for ourselves. We have to have this level of like responsibility and maturity and take it on, because it is our job to either reparent ourselves or, learn how to exist in life with other people that it may be difficult to live with. But if we want to create healthy environments for our children, then we have to make that a priority,
and
and really
schedule date
cover the
nights. Don't
practicing.
forget scheduled date nights for sure. Whether it's you go out dancing, you go out eating, whatever the two of you enjoy, you need to make time for yourselves as well. Because you always also need to, because if you're going to work through those relationships, part of it is remembering how to be a couple.
Yeah, and also having some alone time.
Yes, definitely. That may
Yeah,
be the hardest sometimes.
to find that time
Yeah.
for yourself. Yeah,
Yeah.
you need to miss the other person a little bit. So, I know you have like a ton of resources that I do want you to share with everybody. And I like I said, I am definitely going to invite you to do some more recordings with me because I think that we share a lot of the similar goals in helping parents, and finding support for them is not always the easiest thing to do. But, I want them to know that it exists, that it even exists within the community. So, that way they could feel not left out in the dark, like I want you to
Right.
like
Yeah.
we exist, we care, we love you guys, and we want people to thrive, especially within the community. Um and Francis is just like a wealth of information. I had one conversation with him and he told me like about a million movies and this and that. I was
Yes.
like, oh my goodness, you
And
have,
growing.
yeah, like you're really good with that stuff. That is definitely your strength. I love how you support everybody. That's really a beautiful thing that you do. Like you really do care. And I know that you're very present in your work and it shows. You're extremely professional. Like I'm very laid back. You're not. You're like so on top of it. I think that's a really wonderful quality that you have. And, I'm really happy that your son has you because you are a wealth of information, right? And you're just so good at I think sharing the information, looking for it. Obviously, you're great about that and you're very passionate about this.
I think that's a key what you're saying. I think one very important thing is to sort of stay humble and know and have the humility that you'll never know it all, and to actually, save people's names when they're not in the room. Like when you mentioned like George Laura's Urban Hibaro, he's somebody who I look up to a lot because that's one of his things. He likes to pay it forward. He also does like to, bring people to the table. If he knows of somebody when they're not in the room, he's like, so and so, you and so should definitely talk because he's a bridge. So I think people need to learn. Everybody needs to learn a little bit how to bridge others, even if it's not what you do all the time. But keep an ear out for, oh, what does this person need?
Yeah.
Who do I know? How can I help them get that?
Yes.
You don't have to, it doesn't have to be your job, but if you have something that you can share and it's, something that's for free, it's a piece of information, go
Hmm.
ahead, share it. Don't hoard it. What are you going to do with all that information at the end of the day?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that's important. Because I mean, for me personally, like I'm always, I think just trying to lift up the community, right? I want our names in the spaces. I
Hmm.
really want that. I want other people who look like us and have gone through our experiences to know that we're out there, like we're trying our best, right? Because not everybody could do this, not everybody wants to do it,
Right.
but I really love doing this. I
Exactly.
love it. I really love public health, like I'm very dedicated to that. And I think that we really need to create more inclusion, diversity, and equality. Like we really do. And I think that's a mission for me for sure. And I see that with you, and I think that's why I really respect you a lot. Um, but thank you so much for coming on. I'm gonna stop it here because although like I said, we could talk about so many different things. I think we need to just make other podcast
Right.
episodes on these and keep sharing the information. And
Full process because it's a lot.
yeah. But Francis, share where can people find you and tap into what you have to share with everybody.
Well, there's the traveling therapists NYC. So traveling therapist at New York at gmail.com. So that's also kind of connected to my website. And just, LinkedIn as well. Just look me up, just Mr. Francis Lora. It's the easiest thing to do. That's one of the places where I'm always kind of
You live
posting
there.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
I
you live
basically
on
did.
LinkedIn. Yeah.
I think everybody has their,
It's what to
places. Some
do.
people are Facebook, some people are Instagram, but I think that my people are the professionals on LinkedIn who are also, everyday people who are now also sharing their stories on that platform. And I think that's a good step for the platform itself to include more of this.
Yeah, yeah. I need to use LinkedIn a little better, but I'm not used to it. I'm an Instagram person, but yeah, I think you definitely live on LinkedIn because that's where you always reach out to me. But that's a good place. I think that's a great place to be with this kind of services that you offer. It's probably like the perfect place for you. But all right, I want to thank you so much for, spending some time with me on the recording, for sharing your knowledge. And I cannot wait to do some more episodes with you because there are so many. Like, this was just a little tiny nothing, right? This was like a
Right. Yeah.
little, because I wanted to get a dad on. This was important for me, but I know that there's just so much that we could talk about that I'm really looking forward to having you in the future. You know, we have to figure it out, but thank
Yeah,
you.
I know our time frame. We're always busy. So I thank you for,
Hard.
finding a little sliver of time in your schedule, and I appreciate it. And as always, you can always feel free, shoot me an email real quick or whatever.
I will. All right, Francis, thank you so, so very much for your time and for your just, even dealing with me and my crazy schedule, because just like you said, it's crazy. It's crazy. Unfortunately, I wish I had more free time to do these things because I love it. It's just not.
Maybe one day. I mean, that's the other thing. We aim to eventually do that which we love.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Alrighty.
If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your family and friends. Also, join me for my group parenting sessions. I want you to be the first to know, so go directly to my website at www.drdivinalopez.com and share your email with me. That way you'll be the first to know when sessions start. Also, you can find me on Instagram at Dancing Into Parenthood and on TikTok at Dr. Divina Lopez. Also, if you like this podcast, please subscribe. That way you always know when a new episode drops. I love you. Bye.
Please keep in mind that all advice given in this podcast is general information. To understand your specific situation, you must consult with your pediatrician.